I saw two kittens literally holding on to each other, and I knew if I got this wrong, I'd lose one of them. My name is Tessa. I'm 29. That morning, my work phone rang before the sun was properly up, the way it only does when something is urgent and nobody has time to be polite about it. A caller said they'd heard kittens under the porch of an abandoned row house, down in that dark crawl space where nobody really looks. I grabbed a carrier, a thermal blanket, and drove with my shoulders tight the whole way. Syracuse mornings in late fall have that damp cold that gets into your wrists. The row house was slumped in on itself, porch steps soft with rot. I knelt and shined my phone light into the dark space underneath, and there they were, two Siamese seal point kittens, maybe 10 or 11 weeks old. Cream bodies, dark ears and masks, little ink-dipped paws. Their coats looked slightly damp from the mist, not soaked, just chilled. One was pressed back as far as he could go, trembling, face half hidden. The other put his body in front of him like a shield. They didn't scatter. They couldn't. They were stretched toward each other, paw to paw, like the contact itself was the only thing keeping their heads above water. I slid my hand in slowly, trying to scoop the front one first. The second kitten let out this thin, raw sound, more panic than meow, and the trembling one went still in a way that scared me. Not fainting exactly, just shutting down, like his mind left the room. I froze. Then I told myself, quietly, okay, not one at a time. Not today. I set the carrier on its side at the edge of the porch, made a little tunnel with the blanket, and tucked the warmest part of it inside. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I placed my palm at the opening, steady and open, letting my skin be the first safe thing they touched. The brave one sniffed, hesitated, then stepped forward. He looked back once, just once, and reached his paw toward his sibling. The trembling kitten answered, tapping him like a promise. Together they crawled into the carrier, bodies pressed tight, their paws still searching until they found each other through the blanket. In my car, heater on low, they finally stopped shaking. Only when they were touching. And all I could think was, what am I going to do when I get to intake, where the rules say they have to be separated right away? The drive back felt longer than it was. Every time I stopped at a light, the carrier shifted slightly on the passenger seat, and both kittens would wake at once, like they shared one nervous system. The bolder one would push his nose to the plastic door, then reach a paw back until he found his sibling through the blanket. Only then would he settle. I work intake at a local shelter. Not the kind with a big fancy lobby, just a plain building with a steady stream of animals and a staff that's always moving. When I walked in, the intake room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee from the vending machine. It's a smell that clings to your clothes even after you go home. 2 kittens? My coworker said, already pulling forms. She glanced at the carrier and smiled the automatic kind of smile people use to keep themselves from feeling too much. Okay. 2 cards, 2 kennels, 2 photo sets. I set the carrier down on the stainless steel table and opened it just enough to peek inside. The kittens didn't bolt. They didn't even try. They were pressed together so tightly it looked like one small animal with 2 sets of ears. When I slid my fingers in, the braver one leaned into my hand, then immediately checked. Paw out, touch, confirm. The quieter one kept his face tucked, but his paw stayed out like an anchor line. They're bonded, I said before I could talk myself out of it. I know they're siblings, but look, they regulate each other. Separate them and one just shuts down. My supervisor for the shift, Dan, came over with a clipboard tucked against his chest. He had that calm, flat expression you get after years of making hard decisions quickly. I hear you, he said, like he'd said it 100 times. Then, softer but firm. But pairs get adopted half as often. We need movement. We're full. That hit me in the part of my brain that hates feelings and loves numbers. Because he wasn't wrong. I've seen the charts. 2 kittens means double the food, double the litter, double the time. People say they want 2 until they stand in front of 2 and picture the reality of it. I looked down at the carrier again. The bolder kitten had lifted his head and was watching my face, like he was trying to read what came next. The quieter one shifted just enough to keep contact, paw sliding until it pressed into the other's wrist. Let me try something, I said. Dan didn't argue, but he didn't promise anything either. He just stepped back and let me make my case with my hands. I placed 2 small kennels side by side in the intake row, the closest I could get without breaking protocol. Then I opened the carrier and guided them in gently, one after the other, keeping my palm between them like a bridge. The moment the door between the kennels was shut, both kittens startled. Their eyes went wide. The quiet one made that tiny breathy sound again, like a question he didn't know how to ask. I slid the kennels closer until the bars almost touched, close enough that they could reach through. The braver kitten stretched his paw out first. The quiet one met him halfway, and their toes hooked together through the metal. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, immediate. And then, this is the part that made the whole room go still. The braver kitten lowered his head and rested it against the other's shoulder, like he was shielding him from the entire world with the weight of his own little body. For a second, nobody spoke. Even the intake room sounded quieter, like the building itself noticed. Dan cleared his throat, eyes flicking away like he didn't want to be caught caring. "We've got website photos in an hour," he said. "You know the rule. No contact during shoots." I kept my hand on the kennel door a moment longer than necessary, feeling my pulse in my fingertips, because I did know the rule. And I also knew these two didn't. We walked down the short hallway to the photo room, and I could feel myself trying to breathe slower than my thoughts. The kittens rode in the carrier together, pressed in the same corner, one paw always finding the other like it was a habit older than them. The photo room is small, too bright, and meant to look like nothing at all. White backdrop. Ring light. A little table wiped down between animals. The goal is simple. Clean face, clear eyes, a picture that makes someone pause while scrolling. My coworker, Jenna, set the carrier down and said, "Okay, quick in and out." She wasn't being cruel. She was being efficient, which is its own kind of danger in places like this. "We're not supposed to," I started. "I know," she cut in gently, "but we do them one at a time. It's how it works." She lifted the braver kitten first. He didn't scratch, didn't flail. He just went stiff in her hands, like a toy someone had set down wrong. She placed him on the table, and the light hit his seal point mask so hard it made his eyes look almost glassy. At first, I thought, okay, he's just startled. Then I saw it. He stopped being a kitten. His body locked. His gaze went somewhere far past the camera. His breathing turned shallow and quick, like he couldn't find a rhythm. He wasn't fighting. He was disappearing. And the second he realized his sibling wasn't there, his head dipped, like he was trying to fold inward. Behind us, inside the carrier, the quieter kitten let out a sound that wasn't a normal meow. It was thin and frantic, over and over, like he was calling into a tunnel. Each cry tightened something in my chest. I've heard fear in a lot of voices, but this was specific. It was, "Where did you go? Where did you go? Where did you go?" "Can I have 1 minute?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Jenna glanced at the hallway. "Tessa, we've got a line." Dan's voice came from the doorway, flat. "We can't hold up the room." I looked at the kitten on the table. His eyes weren't even blinking right. He was still, but not calm. And in the carrier, the other one was throwing his whole small body against the plastic door, like he could push his way through panic. I made a choice before I could talk myself out of it. I slid the carrier up onto the edge of the table. Close. Not open. Not breaking the rule completely. Just close enough that the kitten on the table could reach the side of the carrier with his paw. He stretched without lifting his head, like his body knew what to do even when his mind didn't. His paw patted the carrier wall, searching. Inside, the quieter kitten pressed his paw out through the little air slots. Their toes touched through the gap. Barely. Just a brush. And I watched the braver one come back. It wasn't dramatic. His shoulders loosened by a fraction. His breath slowed. He blinked once, then again, and his eyes finally looked at something real. Not the light, not the camera. Me. The world. He didn't pose. He didn't do the cute head tilt people want. But he was present, and that mattered more than any perfect picture. Jenna lowered the camera and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath too. Dan stepped closer, watching the contact, and his mouth tightened. "This looks dependent," he said. "That's harder to place." Harder to place. Like they were inventory. I felt my face go warm, but my hands stayed steady on the carrier. The quieter kitten kept his paw out, touching, refusing to let go first. And I understood, in a clean, bright room meant for cute, that the real conflict wasn't about photos at all. If I followed the rules, they'd become two numbers with two separate listings. If I didn't, I could become the problem. And I didn't know yet which one I was more afraid of. By the time my shift ended, the building had that tired hush it gets right before closing. Phones quieter, lights dimmer in the public hallway, staff moving slower because there's only so much you can carry in one day. I was rinsing out a bowl when my manager, Carla, asked me to come into her office. She didn't sound angry. That almost made it worse. Her office was cramped, a little space carved out behind intake, a desk, 2 chairs, a bulletin board with reminders, and a calendar full of scribbles. She waited until I sat down. "You're getting too involved," she said, not unkindly. "I get it, but we can't keep a pair here for months." I stared at a stain on the edge of her desk, like it might give me a better answer than my own mouth. Carla tapped her pen. "Here's the compromise. List them as individual kittens. Separate write-ups, separate photos. If someone happens to want both, great. But we don't lead with must go together. Not right now." On paper, it sounded reasonable. It was the kind of decision that keeps doors open and cages available. It was also the kind of decision that turns a bond into a coincidence. Because I've seen what happens. Someone falls in love with the braver one, takes him home, and the quieter one stays. Or the quieter one goes first because someone wants a calmer cat, and the braver one spins in place afterward like he's lost his purpose. Separate marketing almost always ends with separate lives. I opened my mouth to argue, and then I felt my own old fear flare up, sharp and familiar. I don't like to admit this, but I'm scared of attachment. Not theirs. Mine. A few years ago, I took a dog home just for the weekend. He was supposed to decompress and come back ready for adoption. I told myself I'd be fine. I told myself it was temporary. He left 2 weeks later with a family that was perfect for him, and I smiled and waved and did the whole professional thing. Then I sat in my car and couldn't make myself turn the key. I cried until my face hurt, and afterward, I built a little wall inside myself. I got good at caring from a safe distance. Useful. Efficient. Fine. These 2 kittens were pushing on that wall like they didn't even know it was there. Carla leaned forward. "We have an adoption event this weekend," she said. "I need you to help them look adoptable as individuals. Confident. Independent. Independent. Like it was a skill you could demand on schedule. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do in that moment. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd swallowed something heavy. In the intake hallway, their kennels were still side by side. The braver kitten stood up as soon as he saw me, front paws on the bars, watching. The quieter one lifted his head and made a small, searching sound. Soft this time, not frantic like he was checking the air. Then Carla's footsteps passed somewhere behind me, and instinctively I took a step away. The moment I did, the kittens reacted like I'd moved the floor. They called out, 2 different voices, one higher, one rougher, until their paws found each other through the bars again. When they touched, the sound stopped, like someone had turned off a siren. The braver kitten lowered his head onto his sibling's shoulder, the same way he had before. The quieter one didn't pull away. He leaned in. I stood there, hand on the kennel latch, and felt my decision forming without permission. Maybe the right move wasn't to fight inside the building. Maybe the right move was to get them out of it, even briefly. But then the obvious question hit me hard. Who would agree to foster 2 anxious, bonded kittens at once? That night, I called one of my most reliable foster homes. A couple in their 50s who'd raised more kittens than most people have houseplants. I didn't even finish my sentence before she sighed. "I'd say yes," she told me, "but I'm already stacked. I've got 3 little ones in my spare room and a mama who doesn't want visitors." I thanked her and hung up, staring at my kitchen sink like it was going to tell me what to do next. By the time I got to work the next morning, I'd already made the decision in my body, even if my head was still catching up. I went through the internal process the right way. Paperwork, a quick check-in, supervisor approval for a short evaluation foster. 2 nights, maybe 3, just enough to see what they were like outside the constant noise and rules. When I carried them out in the same carrier, the braver kitten pressed his face to the door and watched the hallway. The quieter one stayed tucked back, but his paw stayed hooked around his sibling's wrist like a tiny seatbelt. At home, the air sounded different. No echo of barking. No metal doors. Just my apartment, the faint hum of the fridge, the kettle clicking as it cooled, my own footsteps soft on the floor. I set them up in my spare room with a low box, food, water, a small bed. I sat on the floor and waited, pretending I wasn't watching every breath. They didn't rush out. They didn't play right away. They watched the corners like the corners might move. The braver one stepped out first, one cautious paw on the rug, then two. He glanced back every few seconds, checking. The quieter one followed like he was attached by an invisible string. Every time the distance stretched more than a foot, the braver kitten reached back and tapped him, just once, like, "Come on, I'm still here." They explored the room like one creature split into two bodies. The braver one would approach the closet door, sniff it, then step back. The quieter one would come up beside him, touch his shoulder with a paw, and only then would they both take another step. At one point I coughed, just a normal little throat cough, and both kittens froze. The braver one puffed up a fraction, not aggressive, just startled. The quieter one folded down low, eyes wide. Then the braver kitten turned and pressed his side against him, grounding him. The fear drained out in slow increments, like a faucet being turned off. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of soft scuffling. I cracked the door and saw them by the bathroom threshold, noses tilted up like the room held a secret. The braver one stood at the line between carpet and tile, front paws on the cold floor, back paws still in safety. He looked over his shoulder. The quieter one was behind him, hesitant. The braver kitten reached back, touched his paw, waited until the other one stepped forward. Only then did he cross into the bathroom. Not first. Not alone. Together. I sat on the floor in the dark and felt something settle in me, heavy and clear. For them, separation wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of panic that swallowed the whole world. And the same dilemma I'd been trying to avoid came back, sharper now that I'd seen it up close. If I said out loud that they needed to stay together, fewer people would even consider them. But if I kept quiet, the system would almost certainly split them. By morning, I knew what I had to do next. I was going to tell the truth in writing, and I was terrified that honesty would scare everyone away. Back at work, I carried them in the same way I'd carried them out. Together, one carrier, two bodies pressed into one warm shape. The braver kitten watched every doorway. The quieter one kept his paw threaded through the blanket until he felt his sibling's fur. I set them back into side-by-side kennels, close enough for their paws to meet through the bars. The moment they touched, both of them softened, like they could finally breathe the same air again. During my break, I sat in the staff room with my phone and a cup of coffee. I didn't really want. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I wasn't trying to write something cute. I wasn't trying to make people go, "Ah." I wrote the truth. I wrote about the abandoned row house porch, about the constant roar of the overpass, about how one kitten went rigid and empty the second he was alone under the lights, about how the other kitten cried until his voice sounded too big for his body. I tried to put it in simple words, the way I'd tell a friend. One of them shuts down in solitude, and the other one becomes his anchor. Not a gimmick, not a trick, just how they survive. And I wrote the line that scared me the most, that a home for them wasn't a couch or a window ledge. It was presence. It was being allowed to keep the one relationship they clearly understood. Before I hit post, my hand actually shook, because in this work you learn to sell easy, friendly, independent, low maintenance. You learn to smooth the rough edges so people will say yes. These two weren't easy. They were honest. I posted it anyway. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the comments started to come in. Fast, blunt, like they always do online. Why make it harder than it needs to be? Just give them both a chance. Someone will take one. Sounds like you're projecting. 2 kittens is too much. Each one landed like a small slap. I stared at the screen and felt heat rise behind my eyes. I tried to remind myself that strangers don't owe me softness, but it still hurt because I wasn't asking for praise. I was asking for someone to understand what I'd seen with my own eyes. I sat there longer than my break, coffee going cold, and a thought crept in that I didn't want to admit. Maybe Carla and Dan were right. Maybe I was turning this into a personal crusade because I couldn't stand the idea of letting go. Maybe I was trying to be the hero in a story that didn't need one. Maybe I was making it about me. My chest felt tight, the way it does when you're trying not to cry at work. That's when I felt a weight against my shin. Our old shelter dog, a calm greyhound mix who spends his days drifting between offices like he owns the place, had walked in without making a sound. He lowered himself beside my chair with a slow, careful sigh, like he'd been carrying something heavy too. He didn't look at my phone. He didn't demand anything. He just leaned his long body close enough that I could feel the warmth through my jeans. It was stupid, but it steadied me. Like he was saying, in the only language he had, don't do what's convenient. Do what's right. I put my phone down and rubbed his ear once, quick, before anyone could see. Then I stood up, washed my face in the sink, and went back out to check on the kittens. The braver one rose as soon as I approached. The quieter one lifted his paw, found the bars, and reached until he touched his sibling again. They held on like it was simple. Tomorrow was the adoption event, and if no one showed up for both of them, the pressure to split them would get louder. I walked back into the hallway with that thought sitting in my throat, heavy as a stone, and wondered what tomorrow would actually bring. The next day, the shelter felt like a different planet. There were balloons tied to folding tables, kids running in circles with paper cups of juice, a constant layer of voices, laughing, bargaining, squealing, calling names. Somebody had put music on low in the lobby, like that could smooth out the reality underneath it all. I carried the kittens out in their carrier and set them in a quieter corner away from the main flow. Not hidden, just protected. I lined their kennel up so they could sit side by side and still reach each other through the bars. The braver one stood immediately, ears forward, tracking movement. The quieter one stayed tucked back until his paw found the others. Then he inched closer, like the touch gave him permission. People came fast. "Oh my gosh, Siamese!" a woman said, pressing her face close to the bars like it was a display. "Look at those markings." "They're seal point," I answered automatically, then caught myself. Labels didn't matter. What mattered was what happened next. "Can we meet just this one?" she asked, pointing at the braver kitten. "They're a pair," I said, keeping my voice soft. "They do best together." Her smile tightened. We only planned for one. And then she walked away, already turning her attention to the next kennel. It was quick, almost casual, but I felt it like a door shutting. That happened again and again. People would brighten when they saw the blue eyes and the dark masks. Then their faces would shift the moment I said together. Some were kind about it. Some just moved on without another word. Every time, the braver kitten would step forward like he wanted to try anyway, and the quieter one would reach for his paw like, "Don't go too far." By midday, my stomach hurt from holding myself together. I started doing that thing I hate, negotiating in my own head before anyone even asked. Maybe I could say, preferably together. Maybe I could leave room. Maybe I could just not lead with it. Just let someone fall in love first. I hated myself for thinking it, but the thought kept coming. If I don't bend, I might break them anyway. That's when I noticed a family standing back from the noise. A woman in her 40s, a man beside her, and a teenager with a backpack slung over one shoulder like they'd come straight from somewhere else. They didn't reach their hands toward the kennel. They didn't squeal. They didn't talk over each other. They crouched down on the floor a few feet away and just watched. The braver kitten stared right back, then glanced over his shoulder. The quieter one shifted, paws searching until it found the other through the bars. The teenager leaned in, eyes focused, and whispered, more to himself than to his parents, I think. "See? He's checking where the other one is." The woman looked up at me. No big smile, no performance, just a steady face. "If we take two," she asked quietly, "are we actually making it better for them? Or are we just chasing a pretty story?" It was the most grown-up question anyone had asked all day. I swallowed. "It's better only if you're willing to respect what they already have," I said. "Not to fix it out of them. They calm each other down. They don't do well separated. They might get braver over time, but it has to be on their terms." The man nodded slowly, like he was fitting that information into something he already understood. "We're like that at home," he said. "We hold each other up. That's how we've made it through stuff." The teenager kept watching the kittens, not the adults. The braver one pressed his head briefly against his sibling's shoulder, then looked back at the family again as if he was asking, "Are you safe?" For the first time all day, I felt my chest loosen. We moved through the steps, questions, conversation, the start of paperwork. The family didn't rush. They didn't try to bargain me into changing my story. They accepted it. But even as my hands guided them toward the desk, a new fear slipped in, sharp as a cold draft. Paperwork isn't the end. A quiet corner in a loud building isn't a home. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if, once they're out of here, no bars, no familiar smells, no controlled distance, what if their anxiety gets even bigger? What if I've asked this family to take on something heavier than they realize? A few days later, I drove them out to their new place in the suburbs, the carrier buckled in like precious cargo. The kittens were calm in a way I hadn't seen at first. Still close, still touching, but not braced for impact. The braver one sat upright and watched the passing trees. The quieter one kept his paw pressed against his sibling's side, like a steady heartbeat. The house was modest and warm. You could tell people lived there on purpose. Shoes lined up by the door, a coat hook actually being used, a soft blanket folded on the couch. No chaos, no rush, just a calm pace. The family had already set a room just for the kittens. One safe space, one routine. A little box in the corner, food and water placed apart, a low bed, a couple of simple toys. Nothing fancy, everything intentional. They didn't scoop the kittens up for photos. They didn't invite neighbors over to see the new pets. They just opened the carrier door, sat on the floor, and let the kittens decide the speed. The braver kitten stepped out first, nose working, tail low but moving. He took 3 steps, then turned and reached back. The quieter one touched his paw, then followed. They crossed the room like a team, pausing together at each new smell, each shadow, each corner. Within minutes, something small but important happened. The braver one walked to the food bowl without looking over his shoulder every second. He ate 2 bites, then turned his head so his sibling could see him. The quieter one didn't rush. He came over when he was ready, sniffed the bowl, and took a careful bite of his own. No panic, no frantic calling, just a shared moment. The teenager sat with me in the hallway while his parents talked through the last details. He nodded toward the room and said, quietly, "We don't need them to be brave alone. We just want them to feel safe being themselves." I smiled because it was so simple and so right. When it was time to leave, I didn't drag the moment out. I just stood in the doorway and watched the kittens settle. 2 small bodies, close but not clenched, like they finally had space to breathe. On the porch, the air felt lighter. I walked back to my car with a kind of energy I don't always get from this job. Not adrenaline. Something steadier, like relief with a pulse. Sometimes the right choice isn't the most efficient one. It's the one that treats a living bond like it matters. A week later, I got a text from them. No big caption, just a short video. One kitten was on the windowsill, sun on his face, watching the backyard. The other was down on the rug with a toy, busy in his own little world. And the best part was what didn't happen. No frantic calling, no panic. Just a quick glance, like a check-in, and then they both went back to what they were doing.